Captain Lee Hana stood in front of the mirror in her quarters, adjusting the final piece of her power armor. The white metal gleamed under the bright lights, polished to perfection. Every surface was clean and bright like fresh snow on a mountaintop. She had spent 2 hours that morning making sure everything looked perfect. The armor was her pride, a symbol of humanity's best warriors. The ship around her hummed with quiet energy. The Taeguk was one of humanity's newest dreadnoughts, built for long missions in deep space. Hana had been its captain for 3 years now, and she knew every sound the ship made. Today, something felt different. The crew moved with more purpose, their voices carried a hint of worry. A soft knock came at her door. "Come in," Hana called out. Sergeant Park Ji-ho entered, his own armor clean but not as bright as hers. He was a good soldier, steady and reliable. Behind him came Corporal Kim Do-yeon, younger but eager to prove himself. Both men looked serious. "Captain, we have new orders," Ji-ho said, holding out a datapad. "Command wants us to check on the new Bizan colony. They stopped answering messages 2 days ago." Hana took the pad and read quickly. New Bizan was a frontier colony, far from the main shipping lanes. About 50,000 people lived there, mostly farmers and miners. It was the kind of place where people went to start over, to build something new. "What do we know about the situation?" she asked. "Not much," Do-yeon replied. "The last message they sent was about strange ships in their outer system, then nothing." Hana nodded. Strange ships could mean many things. Pirates, maybe, or lost traders? But something in her gut told her this was bigger. She had learned to trust that feeling over the years. "How long to get there?" she asked. 18 hours at full speed, Ji-ho answered. "Good. Tell the crew to prepare for anything. I want all weapons checked and all armor inspected. If there's trouble waiting for us, we'll be ready." The 2 men saluted and left. Hana looked at herself in the mirror again. The white armor seemed to glow with its own light. She had worn it through dozens of missions, but it had never seen real combat. Most of her work involved showing the flag, reminding pirates and smugglers that humanity was watching. She walked to the bridge, her boots making soft sounds on the metal floor. The crew turned to look at her as she entered. They always did. The white armor commanded respect and attention. It meant she was one of the elite, the Vanguard Corps' humanity's finest warriors. "Status report," she ordered. Lieutenant Commander Kang Nara, her second in command, stood from the captain's chair. "All systems ready, Captain. We're moving at maximum speed toward New Bizan. No other ships detected in the area." Hana settled into her chair and looked at the main screen. Stars streaked past as the ship traveled faster than light. Somewhere ahead waited answers to their questions. "Tell me about New Bizan," she said. Nara pulled up files on the colony. "Founded 12 years ago. Main industries are farming and rare metal mining. Population just over 50,000. They have basic defenses, nothing special. A few patrol ships, some ground-based weapons. Who's in charge? Captain Ruminho runs colony. Defense, good record, fought in the Centauri conflicts. The civilian governor is Park Sun-mi, been there since the beginning." Hana studied the information. New Bizan was like many frontier colonies, tough people making a life in a dangerous galaxy. They deserved protection, and she would give it to them. Hours passed as the ship traveled through space. Hana spent time with her crew, checking systems and reviewing plans. The ship carried 200 Marines in addition to the ship's crew. If there was fighting to be done, they were ready. She also thought about the larger situation. Humanity had been part of the galactic community for 60 years now. They had made friends and enemies among the stars. Most conflicts were small, border disputes or trade arguments. But there were always rumors of bigger threats. Empires that saw humans as weak newcomers. The Confederation was supposed to keep peace between the different species. It worked most of the time, but the galaxy was huge and the Confederation couldn't be everywhere. Frontier colonies like New Bizan were often on their own when trouble came. "Captain," the communications officer called out. "We're getting close enough to try contacting New Bizan again." "Do it," Hana ordered. They tried for several minutes, sending messages on all frequencies. Nothing came back except empty static. A cold feeling grew in Hannah's stomach. "Try the emergency frequencies," she said. More static. The colony was either completely destroyed or cut off from communication. Neither option was good. "Captain," the sensor officer reported, "I'm picking up debris in the new business system. Looks like ship parts." The cold feeling got worse. "What kind of ships?" "Hard to tell from here. Could be colony patrol craft." Hannah stood up. Around her, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency. They all knew what debris in space usually meant. Someone had been fighting and someone had lost. "All hands prepare for combat," she announced over the ship's communication system. "We don't know what we're going to find, but we're going to be ready for it." The ship's energy changed as weapons powered up and shields activated. Marines checked their equipment one more time. In the hangar bay, smaller ships prepared for launch. Hannah walked to the armory and picked up her weapons. A plasma rifle, perfectly maintained. A combat knife, sharp enough to cut through most armor, grenades, and ammunition. Everything she might need for a fight. She looked at her reflection in the rifle's polished surface. The white armor looked back at her, clean and bright. She had always been proud of how it looked, a symbol of humanity's honor and strength. Soon, she might find out what it looked like after a real battle. The Taiguk dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the new Bizan system. Immediately, alarms started ringing. "Multiple contacts," the sensor officer reported. "Unknown ship types, much larger than anything the colony should have." On the main screen, Hannah saw ships unlike anything in human or Confederation databases. They were dark and angular, built for war. Around them floated the wreckage of New Bizan's defense fleet. "How many?" she asked. "At least 30 ships, various sizes." "Some are huge, Captain. Bigger than us." Hannah felt her heart beat faster, but her voice stayed calm. "Are they moving toward the colony?" "Yes, Captain. And there are signs of fighting on the planet's surface." She closed her eyes for a moment, thinking fast. 30 unknown warships against her single dreadnought. The smart thing would be to retreat, call for help, come back with a fleet, but 50,000 people lived on New Bizan. Every minute counted. "All ships, this is Captain Lee Hannah of the Earth vessel Taiguk," she broadcast on all frequencies. "You are attacking a human colony. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." The response came quickly in a language she didn't recognize. The translation system worked on it for a few seconds. "Human ship, you face the Vorthek Empire. Your people will serve or die. Prepare for battle." Hannah smiled grimly. At least now she knew who they were fighting. "All hands, battle stations," she ordered. "Today we show these Vorthek what humanity is made of." The white armor would soon be tested. Captain Lee Hannah stood in front of the mirror in her quarters, adjusting the final piece of her power armor. The white metal gleamed under the bright lights, polished to perfection. Every surface was clean and bright like fresh snow on a mountaintop. She had spent 2 hours that morning making sure everything looked perfect. The armor was her pride, a symbol of humanity's best warriors. The ship around her hummed with quiet energy. The Taiguk was one of humanity's newest dreadnoughts, built for long missions in deep space. Hannah had been its captain for 3 years now, and she knew every sound the ship made. Today, something felt different. The crew moved with more purpose. Their voices carried a hint of worry. A soft knock came at her door. "Come in," Hannah called out. Sergeant Park Jiho entered, his own armor clean but not as bright as hers. He was a good soldier, steady and reliable. Behind him came Corporal Kim Do-yeon, younger but eager to prove himself. Both men looked serious. "Captain, we have new orders," Jiho said, holding out a datapad. "Command wants us to check on the New Bizan colony. They stopped answering messages 2 days ago." Hannah took the pad and read quickly. New Bizan was a frontier colony, far from the main shipping lanes. About 50,000 people lived there, mostly farmers and miners. It was the kind of place where people went to start over, to build something new. "What do we know about the situation?" she asked. "Not much," Do-yeon replied. The last message they sent was about strange ships in their outer system, then nothing. Hannah nodded. Strange ships could mean many things. Pirates, maybe, or lost traders? But something in her gut told her this was bigger. She had learned to trust that feeling over the years. How long to get there? She asked. 18 hours at full speed, Jiho answered. Good, tell the crew to prepare for anything. I want all weapons checked and all armor inspected. If there's trouble waiting for us, we'll be ready. The two men saluted and left. Hannah looked at herself in the mirror again. The white armor seemed to glow with its own light. She had worn it through dozens of missions, but it had never seen real combat. Most of her work involved showing the flag, reminding pirates and smugglers that humanity was watching. She walked to the bridge, her boots making soft sounds on the metal floor. The crew turned to look at her as she entered. They always did. The white armor commanded respect and attention. It meant she was one of the elite, the Vanguard Corps' humanity's finest warriors. Status report, she ordered. Lieutenant Commander Kong Nara, her second in command, stood from the captain's chair. All systems ready, Captain. We're moving at maximum speed toward New Bizan. No other ships detected in the area. Hannah settled into her chair and looked at the main screen. Stars streaked past as the ship traveled faster than light. Somewhere ahead waited answers to their questions. Tell me about New Bizan, she said. Nara pulled up files on the colony. Founded 12 years ago. Main industries are farming and rare metal mining. Population just over 50,000. They have basic defenses, nothing special. A few patrol ships, some ground-based weapons. Who's in charge? Captain Ruminho runs colony. Defense, good record, fought in the Centauri conflicts. The civilian governor is Park Sunmi, been there since the beginning. Hannah studied the information. New Bizan was like many frontier colonies, tough people making a life in a dangerous galaxy. They deserved protection, and she would give it to them. Hours passed as the ship traveled through space. Hannah spent time with her crew, checking systems and reviewing plans. The ship carried 200 Marines in addition to the ship's crew. If there was fighting to be done, they were ready. She also thought about the larger situation. Humanity had been part of the galactic community for 60 years now. They had made friends and enemies among the stars. Most conflicts were small, border disputes or trade arguments. But there were always rumors of bigger threats. Empires that saw humans as weak newcomers. The Confederation was supposed to keep peace between the different species. It worked most of the time, but the galaxy was huge and the Confederation couldn't be everywhere. Frontier colonies like New Bizan were often on their own when trouble came. Captain, the communications officer called out. We're getting close enough to try contacting New Bizan again. Do it, Hannah ordered. They tried for several minutes, sending messages on all frequencies. Nothing came back except empty static. A cold feeling grew in Hannah's stomach. Try the emergency frequencies, she said. More static. The colony was either completely destroyed or cut off from communication. Neither option was good. Captain, the sensor officer reported, I'm picking up debris in the New Bizan system. Looks like ship parts. The cold feeling got worse. What kind of ships? Hard to tell from here. Could be colony patrol craft. Hannah stood up. Around her, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency. They all knew what debris in space usually meant. Someone had been fighting and someone had lost. All hands prepare for combat, she announced over the ship's communication system. We don't know what we're going to find, but we're going to be ready for it. The ship's energy changed as weapons powered up and shields activated. Marines checked their equipment one more time. In the hangar bay, smaller ships prepared for launch. Hannah walked to the armory and picked up her weapons. A plasma rifle, perfectly maintained. A combat knife, sharp enough to cut through most armor, grenades and ammunition. Everything she might need for a fight. She looked at her reflection in the rifle's polished surface. The white armor looked back at her, clean and bright. She had always been proud of how it looked, a symbol of humanity's honor and strength. Soon, She might find out what it looked like after a real battle. The Taiguk dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the new Bizan system. Immediately, alarms started ringing. "Multiple contacts," the sensor officer reported. "Unknown ship types, much larger than anything the colony should have." On the main screen, Hana saw ships unlike anything in human or Confederation databases. They were dark and angular, built for war. Around them floated the wreckage of New Bizan's defense fleet. "How many?" she asked. "At least 30 ships, various sizes." "Some are huge, Captain, bigger than us." Hannah felt her heart beat faster, but her voice stayed calm. "Are they moving toward the colony?" "Yes, Captain. And there are signs of fighting on the planet's surface." She closed her eyes for a moment, thinking fast. 30 unknown warships against her single dreadnought. The smart thing would be to retreat, call for help, come back with a fleet, but 50,000 people lived on New Bizan. Every minute counted. "All ships, this is Captain Lee Hana of the Earth vessel Taiguk," she broadcast on all frequencies. "You are attacking a human colony. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." The response came quickly in a language she didn't recognize. The translation system worked on it for a few seconds. "Human ship, you face the Vorthek Empire. Your people will serve or die. Prepare for battle." Hannah smiled grimly. At least now she knew who they were fighting. "All hands, battle stations," she ordered. "Today we show these Vorthek what humanity is made of." The white armor would soon be tested. The first Vorthak energy bolt missed Hannah by inches, leaving a smoking crater in the ground where she had been standing. She rolled behind a damaged transport vehicle and came up firing. Her plasma rifle sent bright bolts into the alien guards around the cages. "Spread out in advance," she shouted over the noise of battle. Don't give them easy targets." The Marines moved like a well-oiled machine, using cover and supporting each other as they pushed forward. But the Vorthak were ready for them. More warriors appeared from the ships and buildings around the spaceport, their black armor making them hard to see in the smoke and shadows. Sergeant Jiho appeared beside her, breathing hard. "Captain, we've got movement on the left flank. Looks like they're trying to surround us." Hannah looked where he pointed and saw Vorthek warriors moving between the damaged buildings. They were smart, these aliens. They didn't just charge straight. Ahead like wild animals. "Take Doyan and 10 Marines," she ordered. "Stop that flanking move. I'll keep pushing toward the cages." Jiho nodded and moved off with his squad. Hannah could hear the sound of fresh fighting as they engaged the aliens on the flank. Every direction seemed to bring new enemies. She sprinted from cover to cover, her white armor bright against the dark wreckage around her. A Vorthik warrior rose from behind a pile of debris, weapon aimed at her head. Captain Minho appeared from nowhere and put 3 rounds into the alien's chest, dropping it instantly. "Thanks," Hannah called out. "Just returning the favor," Minho replied. "My people need to see that someone's fighting for them." They reached the first cage together. Inside, dozens of civilians pressed against the bars, their faces filled with hope and fear. Children cried while their parents tried to comfort them. An elderly man reached through the bars toward Hannah. "Please," he whispered. "Get us out of here." Hannah examined the cage lock. It was alien technology, but simple enough. She placed a small explosive charge against it and stepped back. "Everyone, move to the far side," she called to the civilians. The explosion was small but effective. The lock shattered and the cage door swung open. Civilians poured out, some running toward the edge of the spaceport, others stopping to help the wounded. "That way," Hannah pointed toward the city. "Find cover and wait for evacuation ships." But even as she spoke, she knew evacuation ships weren't coming anytime soon. The Taiguk was still fighting in space, and any transport trying to reach the surface would be shot down by Vorthik fighters. More cages waited across the spaceport. Between her and them stood at least 50 alien warriors, and more were arriving every minute. The smart thing would be to fall back, regroup, wait for reinforcements, but the faces of the civilians burned in her memory. Children who had done nothing wrong except live on a frontier world. Families torn apart by an enemy they had never seen before. All units, continue the advance, she ordered. We're not leaving anyone behind. The fighting became a nightmare of running battles between burning vehicles and collapsed buildings. The Vorthak weapons were powerful, capable of punching through human armor with a single hit. But human weapons were accurate, and human soldiers knew how to work together. Corporal Doyan appeared at her side, his armor scorched by near misses. We cleared the left flank, Captain, but Sergeant Jiho... He paused, swallowing hard. What about Jiho? Hannah demanded. He's hurt bad. Took a direct hit trying to save some kids who were trapped in a building. He's asking for you. Hannah's heart clenched, but she kept her voice steady. Where is he? Doyan led her to a damaged medical center on the edge of the spaceport. Inside, colonial medical staff worked frantically to treat wounded civilians and soldiers. They had set up in what used to be a children's ward, and colorful drawings still decorated some walls. Jiho lay on a makeshift stretcher, his armor cracked open across the chest. Blood soaked through the medical bandages covering his wounds. But his eyes were alert when he saw her approach. Captain, he said weakly, good to see you made it. Hannah knelt beside him, taking his hand. For the first time since the battle started, she felt tears threatening to come. Jiho had been with her for 3 years. He was a good soldier and a better friend. Save your strength, she said. Medical ships will be here soon? Jiho smiled, but it was painful to watch. We both know that's not true, but it's okay. Those kids I saved, they reminded me of my little sister back home, made it worth it. Around them, the sound of fighting continued. Energy weapons discharge? Explosions shook the building, and somewhere in the distance, people were screaming. But in that moment, Hannah's world narrowed to just her and her dying friend. Tell me about your sister, she said softly. Her name is Yunji. She's only 12. Loves to draw pictures of spaceships. Always said she wanted to be a captain like you someday. Jiho's grip on her hand tightened. Promise me something, Captain. Promise me you'll make them pay for what they did here? I promise, Hannah said. Jiho smiled one more time, then his eyes closed and his hand went limp. Sergeant Park Jiho, who had served his people faithfully for 8 years, was gone. Hannah stood slowly, rage building in her chest like a fire. She looked down at her armor and saw something that made her pause. Jiho's blood had splattered across her white breastplate, leaving dark red stains that would never wash out. Dr. Choi Salmon, the medical center's chief doctor, appeared at her side. She was a small woman with gray hair and steady hands. I'm sorry, Captain. We did everything we could. How many wounded do you have here? Hannah asked, her voice cold with controlled anger. 43 civilians, 12 soldiers. Most of them will live if we can get them proper treatment. But we need those evacuation ships. Hannah walked to a window and looked out at the spaceport. More cages waited to be opened. More civilians needed rescue. And more Vorthak warriors were arriving to stop her. Doctor, how long can you hold this position? As long as we have to, Soman replied firmly. These people are my responsibility. Hannah nodded and turned to Doyan. Get on the radio. Tell all unit commanders to converge on the spaceport center. We're going to open every cage and kill every alien between us and those people. Captain, Doyan said carefully, we're down to maybe 30 effectives. The Vorthak have at least twice that many. Then we'll have to be twice as good, Hannah replied. She checked her weapons and ammunition. Half her plasma charges were gone, but she had plenty of conventional rounds for her backup weapon. She looked once more at Jiho's body, then at the blood on her armor. The white plates that had been so clean and bright this morning now carried the stains of war. It was the price of command, the cost of doing what was right. Move out, she ordered. We have people to save. They left the medical center and advanced back toward the spaceport center. The fighting had spread across the entire area now, with small groups of humans and aliens engaged in deadly combat among the wreckage. Hannah moved like a woman possessed, her plasma rifle cutting down Vorthak warriors with mechanical precision. She no longer took cover when she could help it, trusting her armor and her reflexes to keep her alive. The aliens seemed surprised by her aggression, falling back before her advance. One by one, the remaining cages were opened. Families ran for Safety while human soldiers held back the alien guards. Children who had been crying now looked at Hannah with something like worship, seeing hope in her blood-stained white armor, but the cost was terrible. For every cage they opened, another human soldier fell. Marines who had served faithfully for years, colonial troops who had never asked for this war, all paying the price for their victory. As the sun began to set over New Bizan, painting the sky red like blood, Hannah realized they had saved most of the civilians. But they were trapped, surrounded by growing numbers of Vorthek reinforcements. With no way off the planet, the real test was just beginning. Night fell over New Bizan like a black curtain, but the fighting never stopped. Hannah crouched behind the twisted remains of a cargo hauler, watching Vorthak warriors move through the darkness like hunting shadows. Her armor's night vision showed their heat signatures, but it also revealed just how many of them there were. "Captain," Corporal Doyan whispered beside her, "Lieutenant Commander Nara is on the radio. The Taeguk is still fighting, but she says the evacuation fleet is delayed. Maybe another 18 hours? 18 hours. Hannah looked around at what remained of her forces. 23 Marines, 15 colonial troops, and maybe a dozen civilians who had picked up weapons from the dead. Against them, the Vorthak had brought what looked like an entire army. "Tell Nara we'll hold as long as we can," she replied. "But make sure she knows the situation down here is bad." The spaceport had become a fortress of wreckage and desperation. They held the central area where most of the civilians were gathered, but the Vorthak controlled everything around them. Every few hours, the aliens would launch another attack. Testing their defenses, looking for weak spots, Captain Minho crawled over to their position, his face grim. "We've got movement on the eastern perimeter. Looks like they're bringing up heavy weapons." Hannah followed him to a makeshift observation post they had set up in the control tower. Through her scope, she could see Vorthak engineers assembling something that looked like a giant cannon. Even at this distance, it was clearly designed to punch through heavy fortifications. "How long before it's ready?" she asked. "Maybe 2 hours," Minho replied. "When that thing fires, it'll take out our whole defensive line." Hannah studied the weapon and the aliens working on it. The smart military decision would be to fall back, find better defensive positions. But there was nowhere to go. The civilians couldn't move fast enough, and the wounded couldn't move at all. "We need to take it out," she said finally. "With what? We don't have anything that can reach that far, and it's too well defended for a direct assault." Hannah was quiet for a moment thinking, then an idea began to form in her mind. It was dangerous, probably suicidal, but it might work. "What do you know about the colony's industrial facilities?" she asked. "Most of them were hit in the first wave, but the plasma furnaces in the mining sector are still intact." "Why?" "Because plasma furnaces run very hot, and they have safety systems that can be overridden if someone got close enough to one of them. Minho's eyes widened as he understood what she was suggesting. "Captain, that's insane. The explosion would level half the spaceport. But it would take out their heavy weapon and most of their forces in this sector. It might give the civilians time to escape when the evacuation ships arrive. Assuming anyone survives to evacuate them." Hannah looked back at the civilians huddled in the center of their defensive perimeter. Children slept fitfully while their parents stood guard with whatever weapons they could find. Old people who should have been enjoying retirement instead faced death from an enemy they didn't understand. "I'll go," she said quietly. "Captain, no, that's a suicide mission. It's a command decision, my responsibility." But Doyan had heard enough of their conversation to understand what they were planning. "If you're going, I'm going with you," he said firmly. "Corporal, that's not necessary. With respect, Captain, it is necessary. You'll need someone to watch your back, and you'll need someone who knows demolitions. Besides," he smiled grimly, "Sergeant Jiho would never forgive me if I let you go alone." Other soldiers began to gather around them, drawn by the quiet intensity of their conversation. When they learned what Hannah was planning, volunteers stepped forward immediately. "I know those mining tunnels," said Private Kim Subin, a young woman. "From the colonial forces? My father worked there before the attack." I can handle the technical side of overriding the furnace systems," added Sergeant Lee Dong-yuk from the Marines, within minutes. Hannah found herself looking at 8 volunteers, all willing to risk their lives for a plan that would probably kill them all. She felt a fierce pride in these soldiers, mixed with the terrible weight of command. "Listen carefully," she said. "This is not a direct order. Anyone who wants to stay behind can do so with honor. But if we're doing this, we do it right." She spread out a map of the mining sector on the ground. "The furnaces are here, about 2 kilometers from our current position. We'll have to cross through Vorthek-controlled territory to reach them. Once we're there, we override the safety systems and get out as fast as possible." "How much time will we have?" Dong-yuk asked. "Maybe 5 minutes from override to explosion?" "Maybe less. The mining tunnels might give us some protection, but—" She didn't need to finish. They all understood the odds. They prepared carefully, taking only essential equipment. "Extra ammunition, demolition charges, medical supplies?" Hannah checked her armor systems one more time. The white plates were now stained with blood, dirt, and smoke from hours of fighting. But the armor itself was still functioning perfectly. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Soman approached her. "Captain, I want you to know something. What you're doing here, what all of you are doing, it's given these people hope. Children who were ready to give up are now talking about tomorrow." "Thank you, Doctor. Take care of them while we're gone." "I will. And Captain, come back alive." "That's an order from someone old enough to be your mother." Hannah smiled for the first time in hours. "I'll do my best." They left the defensive perimeter just after midnight, moving in single file through the ruins of the colony. The night was quiet except for distant sounds of fighting and the occasional Vorthak patrol. Hannah led the way, using her armor sensors to detect enemies before they could spot the human team. The journey to the mining sector took 3 hours of careful movement. They had to avoid 2 major Vorthak camps and countless patrols. Twice they were forced to eliminate sentries silently, adding more alien blood to Hannah's already stained armor. When they finally reached the mining complex, they found it heavily damaged but still partially functional. The plasma furnaces were housed in reinforced underground chambers, originally designed to contain industrial accidents. Now they would contain something much bigger. "There," Subin whispered, pointing to a service entrance. "That leads directly to the main furnace chamber." They made their way inside, weapons ready. The tunnels were dark and filled with smoke from damaged systems. Emergency lights cast eerie shadows on the walls. But they encountered no enemies. The Vorthek had apparently written off the mining sector as unimportant. The main furnace chamber was enormous, containing 3 massive plasma generators that had once refined rare metals from New Bizan's mines. Each one was the size of a small building, humming with barely contained energy. Sergeant Dong-yuk immediately went to work on the control systems. "These safety interlocks are pretty sophisticated," he reported, "but I can bypass them. Question is, do we want all 3 furnaces to overload or just one?" Hannah looked at the massive generators and did quick calculations in her head. 1 furnace would create a significant explosion. 3 would level everything within several kilometers. All 3, she decided. "We need to make sure we get their heavy weapon." As Dong-yuk worked, the rest of the team set up defensive positions. They could hear Vorthek forces moving around outside, apparently aware that something was happening, but not sure what. "Captain," Doyan said quietly, "are we really going to make it out of here?" Hannah looked at him, this young soldier who had followed her into hell without question. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But if we don't, we'll have given those civilians a chance. Sometimes that's all you can do." "Contact," someone called out softly. Vorthek patrol approaching the entrance. The sound of alien voices echoed through the tunnels, getting closer. Whatever element of surprise they had was about to disappear. "How much longer?" Hannah asked Dong-yuk. 2 minutes, maybe 3. She made another command decision, the kind that would haunt her dreams if she lived to have them. "Everyone except Dong-yuk set up a defensive perimeter at the tunnel entrance. Buy him the time he needs. The volunteers moved without hesitation, taking positions that would let them hold off attackers for as long as possible. They all knew it was a death sentence, but none of them complained. As the first Vorthok warriors appeared in the tunnel entrance, Hannah opened fire with her plasma rifle. The narrow space worked in their favor, forcing the aliens to attack in small groups. But it also meant there was nowhere to retreat. The fighting was brutal and desperate. Human and alien blood mixed on the tunnel floor as both sides fought for every meter. Hannah's armor took hit after hit, her white plates now completely covered in stains from battle. "Done," Donyuk called out. "Safety systems are offline. We've got maybe 4 minutes." Hannah looked around at what remained of her team. 3 soldiers lay dead in the tunnel. 2 more were badly wounded, but they had completed their mission. "Move," she ordered. "Emergency exit now." They ran through smoke-filled corridors as the plasma furnaces began to overload behind them. Warning alarms blared throughout the complex. Even the Vorthok warriors seemed to realize something terrible was about to happen. Behind them, the furnaces reached critical mass. The explosion, when it came, lit up the night sky like a second sun. The explosion threw Hannah 50 meters through the air before she crashed into the remains of a mining vehicle. Her armor system screamed warnings as she struggled to her feet, her head ringing from the impact. Behind her, a mushroom cloud rose into the night sky where the plasma furnaces had been. The blast had been even bigger than she had hoped. A crater nearly a kilometer wide marked where the mining complex used to stand. The Vorthok heavy weapon was gone, vaporized along with most of their forces in that sector. But the cost had been terrible. She looked around for her team and found only Corporal Doyon and Private Subin still alive. Donyuk lay motionless under a pile of debris, and the others were simply gone, claimed by the explosion they had caused. "Sound off," she called weakly. "Here, Captain," Doyon replied, his voice pained. He was bleeding from a head wound, but he was moving. "Still alive," Subin added, though she was limping badly on her left leg. In the distance, they could see fires burning across the spaceport. The explosion had damaged both sides, but it had hit the Vorthok harder. Their organized assault had become scattered groups of survivors, just like the humans. Hannah's radio crackled to life. "Captain Hannah, this is Lieutenant Commander Nara. We saw that explosion from orbit. What's your status?" "Alive, barely. Mission accomplished. The Vorthok heavy weapons are gone, but we took heavy casualties." "Understood. The evacuation fleet is still 12 hours out." "Can you hold that long?" Hannah looked at the chaos around them. Fires burned everywhere, alien and human forces were scattered and disorganized, and her own force was down to less than 20 effective soldiers. "We'll hold," she said simply. They made their way back toward the spaceport center, moving carefully through the devastation. The explosion had changed the entire landscape, creating new cover but also new dangers. Unstable buildings threatened to collapse, and damaged power lines sparked in the darkness. When they finally reached their defensive positions, they found Dr. Soman treating wounded civilians by flashlight. The medical center had taken damage from the blast, but she had managed to keep most of her patients alive. "Captain," she said when she saw Hannah approach, "thank God you made it back. But you look terrible." Hannah caught her reflection in a piece of broken glass. Her white armor was now completely unrecognizable, stained with blood, dirt, and smoke. Her helmet was cracked, and several armor plates were missing entirely. She looked like she had crawled out of hell. "How many civilians do we still have?" she asked. "About 2,000 in our immediate area, another 1,000 scattered around the spaceport. Most of the children and elderly are here with us." "Captain." Minho appeared from the darkness, his own uniform torn and bloody. "The explosion bought us some time, but the Vorthok are regrouping. I count at least 3 separate forces moving toward our position." Hannah nodded grimly. The explosion had been a tactical success, but strategically their situation was still desperate. They were outnumbered, running low on ammunition, and trapped on a hostile planet. "What about supplies?" she asked. "Not good. Maybe 4 hours of ammunition for sustained fighting." Medical supplies are almost gone. Food and water for another day, maybe 2 if we're careful. She made quick calculations in her head. 12 hours until the evacuation fleet arrived, but only 4 hours of ammunition. The math was simple and brutal. We need to think differently. She said finally, we can't fight them conventionally anymore. We need to make every shot count, use the terrain, make them pay for every meter. Over the next few hours, they reorganized their defenses. Instead of trying to hold fixed positions, they set up mobile teams that could hit the Vorthak and fade back into the ruins. It was guerrilla warfare, the kind that favored the desperate and the clever. Hannah led by example, taking a small team and hitting Vorthak patrols before disappearing into the maze of damaged buildings. Her blood-stained armor had become a symbol of human resistance. Vorthak warriors who had been confident before now looked over their shoulders, afraid of the ghost in red and white who struck without warning, but the constant fighting was wearing them down. Every engagement cost them soldiers they couldn't replace. Every hour brought new casualties that Dr. Soman struggled to treat with dwindling supplies. The breaking point came just before dawn. A large Vorthak force had surrounded a group of civilians, who had been trying to reach their defensive perimeter. Hannah could see them through her scope, maybe 300 aliens against 50 humans, mostly women and children. We have to help them, Doyon said. Hannah studied the tactical situation. To reach the trapped civilians, they would have to cross open ground under heavy fire. Even if they succeeded, they would be cut off from their main defensive positions. It's a trap, Captain Minho said quietly. They're using those civilians as bait to draw us out. Maybe, Hannah replied, but they're still our people. She looked at the faces around her. These soldiers had followed her through hell, trusted her judgment, bled for her decisions. Now she was asking them to do it again. I won't order anyone to come with me, she said. This is volunteer only. Every single soldier stepped forward. They moved out just as the sun began to rise, casting long shadows across the ruined spaceport. Hannah led the way, her damaged armor gleaming in the morning light. Behind her came the last of humanity's defenders. On New Bizen, ready to die for people they had never met, the Vorthak opened fire as soon as they left cover. Energy bolts filled the air like deadly rain, and human soldiers began falling immediately. But they kept advancing, laying down covering fire, and using every piece of cover they could find. Halfway across the open ground, Hannah realized they weren't going to make it. Too many enemies, too much open space, not enough ammunition. But the trapped civilians were so close now, maybe 200 meters away. That was when she saw him. A single Vorthak warrior stood apart from the others, taller and more heavily armored. His black armor was decorated with symbols she didn't recognize, and he carried a weapon that looked different from the others. When he saw her approaching, he raised his weapon in what might have been a salute. Then he began walking toward her. Alone, the other Vorthak stopped firing as if waiting to see what would happen. The human soldiers also held their fire. Sensing that something important was taking place, Hannah and the alien warrior met in the middle of the battlefield, surrounded by smoke and wreckage. Up close, she could see his face through his helmet's visor. It was alien but somehow familiar, marked by what looked like ritual scars. You are the one they call the Crimson Warrior, he said in accented but clear human speech. Hannah looked down at her armor, now completely stained red with the blood of friends and enemies alike. I am Captain Lee Hannah, Earth Defense Force. I am Nektar, war leader of the Third Claw. Your warriors fight with honor, even in defeat. This is respected among my people. Then let the civilians go. They're not warriors. Nektar was quiet for a moment, studying her. You would trade your life for theirs? If necessary. This also is respected. Very well, Crimson Warrior. Single combat. If you win, the soft ones go free. If I win, they serve the Empire. Hannah looked back at her soldiers, then at the trapped civilians. Children looked out at her through the cage bars, their faces filled with hope and fear. She thought of Sergeant Jiho, of all the good soldiers who had died to get this far. Agreed, she said, drawing her combat knife. The alien warrior smiled, showing teeth that were too sharp. You honor your species, human. Win or lose, you will be remembered. The duel began at dawn on a battlefield stained with blood, while two armies watched and waited to see what courage and desperation could accomplish against overwhelming odds. Vectar moved like liquid death, his blade singing through the air where Hannah's head had been a split second before. She rolled sideways, coming up with her combat knife ready, the morning sun glinting off her blood-stained armor, the Vorthek. War Leader was bigger than her, stronger, and his reach was longer. But Hannah had something he didn't. 3 years of fighting in cramped starship corridors where speed mattered more than strength. She feinted left and struck right, her blade scoring a line across his thigh armor. It didn't penetrate, but it got his attention. He responded with a backhand that would have taken her head off if she hadn't ducked. Around them, both armies watched in complete silence. This was older than warfare, older than politics. This was about honor, about what it meant to be a warrior when everything else was stripped away. You fight well for such a small creature, Vectar said, circling her slowly. You talk too much for someone who's supposed to be fighting, Hannah replied. The alien laughed, a sound like grinding metal. I begin to understand why your species troubles the Empire. You do not know when you are beaten. He lunged forward, his blade moving in a complex pattern that would have been beautiful if it wasn't trying to kill her. Hannah gave ground, parrying desperately, feeling the impact of each blow through her arms and shoulders. But as they fought, she began to understand his style. He was trained for formal duels, for fights with rules and honor. She was trained to survive in a galaxy that didn't care about rules. When he committed to another elaborate attack, she stepped inside his guard and drove her knee into his solar plexus. He doubled over, gasping, and she could have finished him then. Instead, she stepped back and waited for him to recover. Vectar straightened slowly, looking at her with something like respect. You could have killed me then. Why did you not? Because this is about more than just winning, Hannah said. This is about showing that humans can be honorable even in war. Interesting philosophy for a species that uses such brutal tactics. Hannah thought about the plasma furnaces, about the explosion that had killed so many on both sides. Sometimes brutal tactics are necessary to protect innocent people, but that doesn't mean we have to be brutal ourselves. They resumed fighting, but something had changed. The formal patterns were gone, replaced by a more personal combat. Two warriors testing each other, learning about each other through the ancient language of blade against blade. Hannah's armor was slowing her down, damaged systems adding weight without providing protection. But she couldn't afford to remove it, not without losing the psychological advantage it gave her. The blood-stained white plates had become a symbol, and symbols mattered in a fight like this. Vectar was tiring too. His movements were still precise, but they lacked the explosive power of his earlier attacks. A thin line of alien blood ran down his arm where her blade had found a gap in his armor. Tell me, Crimson Warrior, he said during a brief pause, what drives your species to fight so hard? We have studied your people. You are not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most numerous. Yet you resist when others surrender. Hannah wiped sweat from her face, leaving another smear on her already stained armor. Maybe because we know what it's like to be the underdog? Maybe because we've learned that sometimes the only choice is to fight or watch everything you care about disappear. Or maybe, Vectar said thoughtfully, because you are too stubborn to know when you are defeated. They came together again, trading blows with mechanical precision, but Hannah could feel her strength fading, the hours of fighting, the wounds she had accumulated, the weight of command, it was all catching up with her. Vectar sensed her weakness and pressed his attack. His blade came closer each time, forcing her to give more ground. She was backed up against a pile of wreckage now. Nowhere left to retreat. The war leader raised his weapon for a killing blow, and Hannah saw her death in his alien eyes. But in that moment, she heard something that changed everything, a child's voice, calling from the cages where the civilians were held. Please don't give up. Please don't leave us. Hannah looked past Vectar and saw a little girl, maybe 6 years old, pressing her face against the cage bars. The child's eyes were fixed on her with absolute trust, complete faith that somehow the warrior in blood-stained armor would save them all. The little girl reminded her of Jiho's sister, the one who drew pictures of spaceships and dreamed of being a captain someday. She reminded her of every child on every human world who went to sleep, trusting that someone would protect them from the darkness between the stars. When Nektar's blade came down, Hannah was no longer there. She had rolled aside, coming up behind him, her knife finding the gap between his helmet and shoulder armor. Alien blood, hot and thick, flowed over her already stained gauntlets. The war leader staggered, dropping his weapon. He turned to face her, one hand pressed against his wound. "A clever move," he said without anger. "I did not see it coming." Hannah stood ready to finish him, but something made her pause. This alien had treated the duel with honor, had respected the rules they had agreed on. He could have used overwhelming force, could have ignored the challenge entirely. Instead, he had risked everything on single combat. "Yield," she said quietly. "You fought with honor. You don't have to die for this." Nektar looked at her with alien eyes that somehow conveyed very human surprise. "You would spare me after everything my people have done to yours? This fight was between you and me, not between our peoples. You kept your word about the terms. I can keep mine about showing mercy." The war leader was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Around them, the two armies waited to see what would happen next. Hannah could hear the civilians in the cages, holding their breath. Finally, Nektar knelt in the dust and smoke of the battlefield. "I yield to the Crimson Warrior," he called out in a voice loud enough for both armies to hear. "The terms of single combat are fulfilled. The soft ones go free." A cheer went up from the human soldiers, but it was quickly silenced when the Vorthek forces began to move. For a moment, Hannah thought they were going to attack anyway. Honor be damned. Instead, they began withdrawing. Cage doors opened and civilians poured out, running toward the human lines. Children who had been certain they would die found themselves free, protected by a warrior whose armor told the story of their salvation. Nektar rose slowly, still pressing his hand against his wound. "This will not end the war between our peoples," he said to Hannah. "But perhaps it will change how some of us think about humans." "That's all I can ask for," Hannah replied, as the Vorthek forces retreated, carrying their wounded war leader with them. Hannah found herself surrounded by the civilians she had fought to save. They reached out to touch her armor, her weapons, her hands. Some were crying with relief, others simply stared at her with wonder. "Captain," Dr. Soman appeared at her side, "you need medical attention. You're bleeding from at least 6 different wounds." Hannah looked down at herself and realized the doctor was right. Her armor was so stained with blood, her own and others', that she couldn't tell what was damage and what was decoration anymore. "Later," she said. "How long until the evacuation ships arrive?" "Maybe 6 hours now, and Captain." Soman smiled. "I think you can stop worrying about holding the perimeter. Look around." Hannah did look around and saw something that made her heart swell with pride. Human soldiers and civilians were working together to treat the wounded, share supplies, and prepare defensive positions. But more importantly, they were doing it with hope instead of desperation. The little girl who had called out during the duel ran up to her, no longer afraid. "Are you really a captain?" she asked. "Yes, I am. When I grow up, I want to be just like you." Hannah knelt down to the child's eye level, her blood-stained armor creaking with the movement. "Then remember this day. Remember that sometimes the hardest thing to do is show mercy to your enemies. But it's also the most important thing." The child nodded solemnly, then ran back to her parents. Corporal Doyon approached, looking exhausted but alive. "Captain, the Vorthek seem to be pulling back from all positions. It looks like that duel of yours impressed them more than just their war leader." "Maybe," Hannah said. "Or maybe they're just regrouping for another attack. Either way, we keep our guard up until those evacuation ships get here." But as she looked at her reflection in a piece of broken glass, she saw something different than she had that morning. The white armor was completely gone now, transformed into something else entirely. Red with blood, black with smoke, scarred. By battle, it told the story of what humans would do to protect their own, and somehow, that seemed more honorable than pristine white plates had ever been. The evacuation ships appeared in New Bisan's sky like silver angels, their hulls gleaming against the smoke-filled atmosphere. Hannah watched them descend from her position in the spaceport control tower, her crimson armor catching the light from the fires that still burned across the colony. "Captain," Lieutenant Commander Nara's voice crackled through the radio. "Evacuation fleet is in position. First transports are landing now. We estimate 4 hours to get everyone off the surface. 4 hours." After everything they had been through, it seemed almost too good to be true. Around the spaceport, civilians began moving toward the landing zones, carrying wounded and helping children. Hope filled the air like a living thing, but Hannah had learned not to trust hope too much. She kept watching the horizon through her scope, looking for signs of Vorthak movement. The aliens had pulled back after Vectar's defeat, but that didn't mean they were gone. Corporal Doyoung climbed up to the control tower, breathing hard. His armor was almost as stained as hers now, marked by days of desperate fighting. "Captain, we've got a problem. Long-range sensors are picking up massive Vorthak reinforcements moving this way. Looks like their main fleet." Hannah's heart sank. How many ships? At least 100, maybe more. They'll be here in less than 2 hours. She did quick calculations in her head. 4 hours to evacuate everyone, 2 hours before enemy reinforcements arrived. The math was brutally simple. "Get me Captain Minho and Dr. Solman," she ordered, "and find out how many civilians we can get on the first wave of transports." When the two officers arrived, Hannah laid out the situation without sugarcoating it. "We can get maybe half the civilians out before the Vorthak fleet arrives. The rest will be trapped here when the shooting starts again." Dr. Summon's face went pale. "We can't leave anyone behind. These people trusted us to protect them." "And we will," Hannah replied, "but we need to be smart about it. Priority goes to children, wounded, and elderly on the first transports. Everyone else waits for the second wave. What about our forces?" Minho asked. Hannah looked out at the evacuation operations. Families were saying goodbye, not knowing if they would see each other again. Children cried while parents tried to be brave. It was the kind of scene that made her remember why she had become a soldier in the first place. "Combat personnel stay until everyone else is safe," she said finally. "That's not negotiable." "Captain," Doyon said quietly, "if their main fleet gets here before we can evacuate everyone, there won't be any combat personnel left to evacuate. Then we better make sure we slow them down enough to get our people out." Over the next hour, the first wave of transports lifted off, carrying nearly 2,000 civilians to safety. Hannah stood on the landing pad, watching families reunite aboard the ships, seeing hope replace despair in their faces. It made everything they had been through worthwhile, but even as the transports disappeared into the sky, new reports were coming in. The Vorthak reinforcement fleet was moving faster than expected. They would arrive with at least an hour to spare before the second evacuation wave could be completed. "Captain," the sensor operator called out, "I'm reading multiple Vorthak fleets converging on our position. This isn't just a reinforcement. This is an invasion force." Hannah studied the tactical display and felt a chill run down her spine. The alien ships were surrounding the planet, cutting off any escape routes. Whatever was coming next, it was going to be the final battle. She gathered her remaining forces, less than 50 soldiers now, but every one of them a veteran of the fighting on New Bisan. They looked tired, bloody, and battered. But they also looked determined. "Listen up," she said. "The Vorthak are coming back, and they're bringing everything they have. Our job is simple. Hold them off long enough for the second evacuation wave to get our people out. After that, we extract and get off this rock." "What if we can't hold them?" asked Sergeant Lee, one of the few remaining Marines. "Then we make them pay so much for this planet that they think twice before attacking the next human colony." Lieutenant Doyon, he had been promoted during the fighting, stepped forward. "Captain, I volunteer to lead a team to the fusion reactor complex. If we can overload it like we did the plasma furnaces. No," Hana said firmly. We're not sacrificing anyone else unless there's no other choice. We stick together and we all go home. But even as she said it, she could see the doubt in their faces. They all understood the tactical situation. Too many enemies, not enough time, nowhere to run. The smart money said most of them wouldn't survive the next few hours. The Vorthik fleet arrived with the thunder of atmospheric entry. Dozens of landing craft screamed down from the sky, disgorging fresh troops who looked nothing like the warriors they had been fighting. These aliens wore different armor, carried different weapons, and moved with the precision of elite forces. New players, Minho observed grimly. These look like they're special forces. The attack began at sunset, just as the second wave of evacuation transports was beginning to load civilians. But this time, the Vorthak didn't rely on ground assault. They brought orbital fire support, energy beams that could level buildings. In seconds, the human defenders scattered, using every piece of cover they could find. The spaceport became a maze of craters and burning wreckage as the aliens systematically destroyed their defensive positions. Hannah found herself leading a running battle through the ruins, trying to buy time for the evacuating civilians. Her crimson armor made her a target, but it also made her a symbol. Where she fought, other humans rallied. Where she advanced, the Vorthik gave ground. Transport 3 is loaded and lifting off, came the report over the radio. Transport 4 has taken heavy fire and can't reach the landing zone. Through her scope, Hannah could see the fourth transport hovering helplessly while Vorthik fighters strafed its intended landing site. Hundreds of civilians were trapped in the open, pinned down by enemy fire. I'm going after that transport, she announced. Captain, that's suicide, Dorian protested. There are at least 50 enemy troops between us and that landing zone. Then, we better start shooting, Hannah replied. She led the charge across the open ground, her crimson armor gleaming in the light of burning buildings. Behind her came the last of humanity's defenders on New Bizan, their weapons spitting death at the alien forces trying to stop them. The fighting was the worst yet. The new Vorthak troops were better trained, better equipped, and they didn't show the honor that Dektar's warriors had displayed. They used human civilians as shields, targeted medical personnel, and showed no mercy to the wounded, but they hadn't counted on human determination. Soldiers who had been fighting for days without rest found new strength when they saw families in danger. Marines who had already used up their luck half a dozen times somehow found a way to survive one more firefight. Hannah reached the landing zone, just as the transport was running out of time. Vorthak fighters were closing in for another strafing run, and the pilot was preparing to abort the rescue. Negative, she called over the radio. Hold position, we're clearing the zone now. What followed was 5 minutes of the most intense fighting of her life. Energy weapons lit up the evening sky like deadly fireworks. Human soldiers fell, but they kept fighting even as they died. Civilians ran for the transport while defenders bought them time with their lives. When the smoke cleared, Transport 4 was lifting off with its full load of refugees. But the cost had been terrible. Of the 50 soldiers who had made the charge, only 20 were still standing. Last transport is inbound, came the report. ETA 15 minutes. 15 minutes. To hold a position against overwhelming odds. 15 minutes to justify all the sacrifice and pain of the last 3 days. Form up on me, Hannah ordered. One more time. We hold this line until everyone is safe. The surviving defenders took their positions among the wreckage and waited for the final assault. They were outnumbered 10-1, low on ammunition and running on pure adrenaline. But they were also something the Vorthak hadn't expected. They were humans who had decided that some things were worth dying for. The last battle of New Bizan began with the roar of alien weapons and the defiant battle cry of soldiers who refused to surrender. In the center of it all, a figure in blood-stained armor stood like a beacon of hope in the gathering darkness. 3 months after the Battle of New Bizan, Colonel Lihana stood in the observation deck of the Confederation diplomatic station orbiting Centauri Prime. Her new uniform was clean and pressed, her metals polished to perfection. But she still wore the same armor underneath, the crimson plates that had become famous across human space. The diplomatic meetings had been going on for weeks now. Representatives from dozens of species gathered to discuss what the media was calling the new Bisan incident. Everyone wanted to understand how a single human colony had held off an entire Vorthic invasion fleet. "Colonel Hannah," a soft voice called behind her. She turned to see Velthara, a young Zelani diplomat with silver skin and large, curious eyes. The Zelani were one of the Confederation's founding species, known for their careful neutrality and academic approach to galactic politics. "Ambassador Velthara," Hannah replied politely. "Are you ready for today's session?" "Actually, I wanted to speak with you privately first. There are questions that the formal proceedings don't address." They walked to a quiet corner of the observation deck where the stars wheeled slowly past the station's viewport. In the distance, Hannah could see the blue-green world of Centauri Prime, home to nearly 1 billion beings from across the galaxy. "What can I help you with?" Hannah asked. Velthara hesitated, as if unsure how to phrase her question. "Colonel, I've read all the reports from New Bisan, interviewed survivors, studied tactical recordings, analyzed casualty figures. But there's something I don't understand. Which is, how did you do it? Not the tactics or strategy, those are in the reports. But how did you personally survive 3 days of combat that claimed the lives of 90% of your forces?" Hannah thought about the question. It was one she had asked herself many times during the long nights since the evacuation. "I'm not sure I did survive," she said finally. Velthara's large eyes widened with confusion. "I don't understand. The woman who put on clean white armor that first morning died somewhere in the fighting. What came off that planet was someone else, someone harder. Someone who had seen too much and done too much to ever be the same again." The Zelani diplomat was quiet for a moment, considering this. "Is that why you wear the same armor? Even though it's single quotes S.stained?" Hannah looked down at herself. Even through the uniform, the outline of the crimson plates was visible. "I wear it because it tells a story. Every mark, every stain, every scratch represents someone who didn't make it home. I won't forget them by putting on clean armor. The other species in the Confederation are calling you the Blood Knight now. They say you're what happens when humans are pushed too far." Hannah smiled grimly. "Maybe they're right. But I hope they're also learning something else." "What's that?" "That we're not the same species that joined the Confederation 60 years ago. We've grown up. We've learned that sometimes you have to fight not because you want to, but because someone has to." Before Velthara could respond, another voice interrupted them. "Colonel Hannah, the session is about to begin." They turned to see Captain Ruminho approaching, wearing the uniform of the Colonial Defense Force. He had been promoted after New Bisan, put in charge of fortifying the outer colonies. The experience had aged him, but it had also given him a quiet confidence that commanded respect. "How are the colony evacuees settling in?" Hannah asked as they walked toward the conference room. "Better than expected. Most of them have been relocated to safer worlds, closer to the core systems, but some are already talking about going back to rebuild New Bisan." "Even after everything that happened?" "Maybe because of everything that happened. They say they want to honor the people who died protecting them." The diplomatic conference room was a marvel of Confederation engineering, designed to accommodate dozens of different species in comfort. Hannah took her place at the human delegation's table, next to Admiral Kim Jae-in, the head of Earth's military command. "How are you holding up?" the Admiral asked quietly. "I'm functional," Hannah replied. "That's not what I asked." She looked at him, this man who had been her mentor for years. "I have nightmares. I see the faces of everyone who died under my command. I wake up reaching for weapons that aren't there. Dr. Soman says it's normal for survivors." "Dr. Soman is right, but it's also okay to not be okay." Before Hannah could respond, the session began. The Confederation's Secretary General, a dignified Altarian with blue-tinted skin, called for order. "Today we conclude our inquiry into the events at New Bisan," she announced. "We have heard testimony from survivors, analyzed tactical data, and consulted with military experts from across the Confederation. It is time for final statements. One by one, the species representatives gave their assessments. Most praised human courage while expressing concern about human methods. A few questioned whether the colony could have been saved through diplomatic means. Finally, it was Velthara's turn to speak. The young Zalani diplomat stood gracefully, her silver skin reflecting the room's soft lighting. Honored colleagues, she began, I have spent weeks trying to understand what happened at New Bizon. The tactical details are clear enough. But I found myself drawn to a deeper question. What transforms ordinary people into legends? She gestured toward Hannah. Colonel Hannah wears armor that tells a story. When I first saw it, I was disturbed by its appearance. The stains, the damage, the clear evidence of violence.